Rain touched the windows of the De Luca estate like soft fingertips, but inside the mansion, nothing felt gentle. The dining room glowed beneath a chandelier older than most countries. Crystal glasses sparkled. Expensive silverware reflected candlelight. Every detail whispered wealth. And yet, sitting at the far end of the table, Naomi Carter felt completely out of place. Not because of her dress. She had chosen carefully, a simple black gown, elegant without trying too hard. Not because of her manners. She carried herself with quiet confidence. But because every person in the room had already decided she did not belong there. Especially Matteo De Luca's mother. "Your work is photography, correct?" Mrs. De Luca asked smoothly. Naomi nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." "A creative field," the older woman replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Very unpredictable." The comment sounded harmless. It wasn't. Naomi understood immediately. Across the table, Matteo shifted in his seat. 34 years old, heir to the De Luca luxury empire, respected across Italy, feared in boardrooms, and yet strangely silent now. Naomi noticed, and it hurt more than she expected. His younger brother smirked while sipping wine. One aunt barely acknowledged her existence. Another whispered something in Italian that made a few people laugh softly. Naomi understood enough Italian to know it was about her. Still, she smiled. Because she loved Matteo. And because she believed love was supposed to survive difficult things. Dinner continued, but every question felt like an interview she was failing. Where did she grow up? What did her parents do? How did she meet Matteo? Did she intend to continue working after marriage? Each question sounded polite on the surface while hiding judgment underneath. Then came the moment that changed everything. Mrs. De Luca gently placed her fork down. "You are a beautiful young woman," she said calmly. "But families like ours require compatibility. Public image matters. Tradition matters." Silence swallowed the room. Matteo finally spoke. "Mother." "No, Matteo," she interrupted softly. "She deserves honesty." Naomi's chest tightened. Mrs. De Luca looked directly at her. "You may care for each other very much, but love alone is rarely enough for marriages like this." The words landed like cold rain. No one defended Naomi. Not his brother. Not his father. Not even Matteo quickly enough. And that was what hurt the most. Naomi slowly reached for her purse. "I think I should leave." Matteo stood immediately. "Naomi, wait." But she was already walking away from the table with what dignity she had left. Outside, the rain had grown heavier. The massive gates of the De Luca estate stood ahead of her while tears blurred her vision. She hated herself for crying. Hated herself even more because a part of her had expected this. A few seconds later, Matteo caught up to her beneath the stone archway. "Naomi." She turned. Water dripped from his dark coat as he stepped closer. "I'm sorry." She laughed painfully. "For which part?" His jaw tightened. She shouldn't have said those things. But she did. Naomi's voice trembled. And nobody stopped her. "I was trying to handle it carefully." "Carefully?" she repeated. "Matteo, your family sat there looking at me like I was something embarrassing. That's not true." "It is true." For the first time since they met, silence rose between them like a wall. Matteo reached for her hand, but she stepped back. "I love you," he said quietly. Naomi's eyes filled again. That was the problem, because she loved him too, and somehow that was making everything harder. Far above them, thunder rolled across the Milan sky while neither of them noticed that this moment, the moment outside his family's mansion, would quietly shape the next 6 years of their lives. 3 weeks passed after the dinner at the De Luca estate. 3 long weeks of uncomfortable silence, unfinished conversations, and apologies that never seemed big enough to repair what had broken that night. Matteo tried. He sent flowers to Naomi's apartment almost every morning. He canceled meetings just to see her for 20 minutes. He called late at night after board meetings, sounding exhausted but determined. But every conversation eventually returned to the same painful truth. His family still did not accept her. And worse, Matteo still hadn't fully stood against them. Naomi noticed the small things. The hesitation in his voice whenever his mother was mentioned. The way he said, "Give them time." The way he kept trying to create peace between both sides instead of choosing one. At first, she told herself relationships were complicated. But slowly, disappointment began replacing hope. One cold evening in Milan, Naomi sat alone in her apartment staring at untouched tea while rain pressed softly against the windows. Her phone buzzed. Matteo. She closed her eyes before answering. "Hi. I'm outside," he said quietly. A few minutes later, he stepped into her apartment carrying the familiar smell of expensive cologne and rain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Matteo noticed the packed suitcase near the couch. His expression changed instantly. "What's this?" Naomi folded her arms tightly across her chest. "I got an offer in London." Silence. "What kind of offer?" "A fashion media company." She avoided his eyes. "It's a good opportunity." "For how long?" "I don't know." Matteo stared at her as realization slowly settled into his face. "You're leaving." Naomi finally looked at him then. "I can't keep doing this, Matteo." His voice dropped. "Doing what?" "Feeling unwanted every time your family looks at me. They just need time." "That's what you always say." "Because it's true." "No," she replied softly. "Because it's easier than confronting them." The words hit harder than she intended. Matteo looked away briefly, jaw tight. "You think I don't love you enough?" Naomi's eyes filled immediately. "That's what makes this harder," she whispered. "I know you love me." He stepped closer. "Then don't leave." She shook her head slowly. "Love isn't supposed to feel this lonely." The apartment suddenly felt too quiet. Outside, car lights moved through wet streets below, while two people stood in the middle of a love story neither of them knew how to save. Then Matteo spoke again. "What if I talk to them one more time?" Naomi gave a small, painful smile. "You already did. I can fix this." "You can't fix people who don't want me there." He ran a frustrated hand through his dark hair. "So what now? We just throw everything away?" "No," she said quietly. "Your family already did that for us." The words stayed between them like shattered glass. For several seconds, Matteo said nothing at all. Then finally, "I don't want to lose you." Naomi looked at him carefully. For the first time since they met, he didn't look powerful. He looked afraid. And somehow that almost broke her resolve. Almost. But then she remembered the dinner table. The whispers. The humiliation. The silence. Especially his silence. "I need peace, Matteo." His eyes searched hers desperately. "And what about us?" Naomi swallowed hard before answering the question she had spent days avoiding. Maybe love isn't always enough. The pain on his face appeared instantly. Real. Unfiltered. Human. He took a slow step backward as if the words had physically hit him. Naomi nearly cried right there. Because part of her wanted him to fight harder. To say he would leave everything behind for her. To choose her completely. But he didn't. And deep down, both of them understood why. Family chains were difficult to break, even for powerful men. Matteo stared at her suitcase one last time. Then quietly asked, "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow morning." A long silence followed. Finally, he nodded once. Not because he accepted it, but because he had run out of ways to stop it. When he reached the door, he paused without turning around. "I really did love you, Naomi." Tears slipped down her face. "I know." Then he walked away, and neither of them realized yet that goodbye would become far more complicated than either of them expected. London was louder than Milan. Faster too. The streets moved with restless energy. Crowded trains, glowing storefronts, hurried conversations, and skies that always seemed undecided between sunshine and rain. For Naomi Carter, it was exactly what she needed. A place busy enough to distract her from heartbreak. At least that was the plan. 3 months after leaving Italy, Naomi had thrown herself into work completely. The fashion media company that hired her quickly noticed her talent behind the camera. Her photographs carried emotion in a way people remembered. She worked late, skipped weekends, barely slept. Anything to avoid thinking about Matteo De Luca. But heartbreak had a strange way of surviving even the busiest schedules. Especially at night. Especially in silence. And especially now. Naomi stared at the pregnancy test sitting on her bathroom sink while her entire world felt frozen. Positive. Again. She sat slowly on the edge of the bathtub, hands trembling. No! The whisper barely escaped her lips. But the second test said the same thing. Positive. For several minutes she couldn't move. Images flooded her mind one after another. Matteo laughing softly while cooking pasta in her apartment. Matteo pulling her close during late-night walks in Milan. Matteo promising, "We'll figure everything out." Then came the harder memories. His mother's cold smile. That dinner table. The humiliation. The silence. Naomi pressed both hands over her face. A baby. Their baby. Fear arrived first. Not because she doubted her ability to love the child, but because she already knew how complicated this child's existence would become. The heir to the powerful De Luca family. A family that never truly accepted her. Her phone buzzed suddenly on the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. Her best friend Chloe. Naomi answered immediately, trying to sound normal. "Hey, you sound strange," Chloe said instantly. Naomi laughed weakly. "Do I?" "Yes. What happened?" For a moment, Naomi considered lying. Instead, tears quietly filled her eyes. "I'm pregnant." Silence exploded on the other end. Then, "Oh my God." Naomi looked down at the test again. "I don't know what to do. Does Matteo know?" She closed her eyes. "No." "And are you going to tell him?" That question sat heavily in the room. Because despite everything, Naomi knew Matteo would never abandon his child. That wasn't the problem. The problem was everything that came with him. His family, his world, his name. And Naomi was no longer sure she wanted any part of it. "I just got my life back together," she whispered. "I finally stopped feeling small." Chloe's voice softened. "A baby won't make you small." Naomi looked out the bathroom window while rain slid slowly down the glass. "What if his family tries to take the child from me?" "They can't." "But they'll try," Naomi replied quietly. "People with power always try." The thought terrified her more than she wanted to admit. By midnight, Naomi still hadn't slept. She walked slowly through her apartment holding a mug of untouched tea, replaying old memories she had tried so hard to bury. Then her phone rang again. This time her heart nearly stopped. Matteo. His name glowed across the screen like a ghost from another life. Naomi stared at it without breathing. Ring, ring, ring. Finally, she answered. "Hello." For a second, neither of them spoke. Then his familiar voice came softly through the line. "I didn't wake you, did I?" "No. I know it's late." He hesitated. "I just wanted to hear your voice." Naomi's chest tightened painfully. 3 months apart, and somehow he still had this effect on her. "How are you?" he asked quietly. The question nearly destroyed her, because she suddenly carried a secret capable of changing both their lives forever. Naomi swallowed carefully. "I'm fine." It was the first lie she had ever told him. And somehow, deep down, she already knew it wouldn't be the last. 6 years later. "Mom! Hurry!" Laughter echoed across the park as 6-year-old Elijah Carter sprinted through the grass with the kind of energy only children seemed capable of carrying endlessly. Naomi smiled despite herself. "I'm coming." The little boy turned briefly, dark curls bouncing as he grinned brightly at her. But it was his eyes that always caught people's attention. Those deep brown Italian eyes. Matteo's eyes. Even after 6 years, seeing them still did something painful to her heart. Naomi pushed the feeling away and continued walking across the London park, coffee in one hand and Elijah's forgotten backpack in the other. Life looked very different now. The struggling young photographer who once cried herself to sleep in a tiny apartment had become the founder of one of London's fastest-rising fashion branding companies. Her work appeared in magazines across Europe. Luxury brands requested meetings months in advance. People respected her now, listened to her now, And most importantly, nobody could make her feel small anymore. Mom, look! Elijah stood proudly beside a soccer ball near the playground. I scored 3 times. Naomi laughed softly. 3 times? That sounds very serious. It is serious, he replied with dramatic importance. She shook her head affectionately. Some days he reminded her so much of Mateo it was almost unfair. Not just the eyes, the confidence, the charm, the stubbornness, even the way he tilted his head while arguing. Mateo had a son and didn't even know how much of himself lived inside the little boy. Well, not completely true, because Mateo knew about Elijah now. That secret had only lasted 8 months. After Elijah was born, Naomi finally told him the truth. And to his credit, Mateo had boarded a plane to London less than 24 hours later. Naomi still remembered opening her apartment door that snowy morning and finding him standing there speechless. He had looked terrified, emotional, overwhelmed. Then he saw the baby, and everything changed. Mateo had become a devoted father almost instantly. Even from another country, video calls every night, birthdays never missed, school events whenever possible. And every month without fail, he flew from Milan to London to spend time with his son. But while fatherhood came naturally to Mateo, fixing his relationship with Naomi never did. Mom! Naomi blinked back to the present. Elijah pointed toward the park entrance excitedly. He's here. Her heartbeat stumbled immediately, because she already knew who he was. Matteo De Luca stepped out of a black car wearing a dark coat, looking exactly like the kind of man magazines called powerful. Tall, sharp, controlled. But the second Elijah ran toward him, that polished image disappeared completely. Papa! Matteo's entire face softened as he lifted the little boy effortlessly into his arms. There's my champion. I scored 3 goals. 3! Matteo gasped dramatically. Should I start preparing you for the World Cup already? Elijah laughed loudly. Naomi watched quietly from several feet away. This part never got easier. Seeing them together always awakened the version of herself she spent years trying to bury. The version that once imagined family dinners, vacations, marriage, forever. Then Matteo looked up, and for one dangerous second the world felt still again. 6 years later, and that look still existed between them. Too familiar, too emotional, too unfinished. Matteo walked toward her slowly with Elijah still in his arms. You look tired, he said gently. Naomi gave him a look. Hello to you too. A small smile touched his lips. It amazed her sometimes, how age had made him even more attractive while simultaneously making him look sadder. I missed you, Elijah announced suddenly from Matteo's arms. Naomi laughed softly. You saw me this morning. I mean both of you together. Silence. Tiny, brief, dangerous silence. Matteo's eyes flickered toward Naomi carefully. Children noticed more than adults realized. Naomi quickly reached for Elijah's backpack. You ready for lunch? Yes. As they started walking together through the park, Naomi stayed slightly ahead while Matteo walked beside their son. To strangers, they probably looked like a family. Maybe that was why Naomi avoided looking at them directly, because deep down, a part of her still wanted that picture to be real. But another part remembered exactly what loving Matteo De Luca had once cost her. And she refused to survive that kind of heartbreak twice. The charity gala was the kind of event Naomi normally avoided. Too many cameras. Too many wealthy people pretending to be humble for one evening. Too many memories connected to the world she once tried desperately to fit into. Unfortunately, this particular gala involved one of her company's biggest clients, which meant attendance was not optional. You look incredible, Chloe whispered as they entered the grand ballroom in London. Naomi adjusted the sleeve of her dark emerald gown. That's because these heels are distracting everyone from the pain I'm in. Chloe laughed, but Naomi's smile faded almost immediately the second she noticed the crowd shifting near the entrance. Whispers spread quietly across the room. People turning, cameras flashing, and then she saw why. Matteo De Luca had arrived. Tall and composed in a black tuxedo, He moved through the ballroom with effortless confidence while business executives rushed to greet him. His name still carried weight across Europe. But Matteo barely acknowledged any of them. Because the moment he entered, his eyes found Naomi instantly. Chloe sighed softly beside her. That man has been in love with you for at least 10 years. Naomi looked away first. Please don't start. I'm serious. He also came with problems. Before Chloe could answer, Matteo was already approaching them. You disappeared before lunch ended yesterday, he said to Naomi. That's usually what people do after lunch, she replied calmly. A tiny smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. God, that smile was dangerous. Chloe looked between them knowingly before excusing herself almost too happily. Traitor. For a moment, Naomi focused on adjusting her bracelet just to avoid staring directly at Matteo. You've been avoiding me lately, he said quietly. I've been working. You always say that. Because it's usually true. Matteo studied her carefully. 6 years later, Naomi still carried herself the same way when emotionally guarded. Chin slightly lifted, voice calm, eyes harder to read. But he knew her too well. You're upset with me. Naomi finally looked at him then. I'm careful with you. There's a difference. Something painful flickered briefly across his expression. Before either of them could continue, another voice interrupted. Matteo. Naomi froze instantly. She knew that voice. Slowly, she turned. Mrs. DeLuca stood several feet away wearing an elegant silver gown and the same controlled expression Naomi remembered too well. 6 years. And somehow the older woman still had the ability to make Naomi feel 22 again. Matteo's jaw tightened immediately. Mother. But Mrs. DeLuca's attention remained fixed on Naomi. Miss Carter. Naomi gave a polite nod. Mrs. DeLuca. The tension between them became immediate and unmistakable. Even the surrounding guests seemed to sense it. Then something unexpected happened. Mrs. DeLuca smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, but carefully. It's good to see you again. Naomi almost laughed at the absurdity of the sentence. Good? The last time they stood face to face, the woman had quietly helped destroy her relationship. But years had taught Naomi something important. Dignity was often more powerful than anger. You as well, Naomi replied smoothly. Mrs. DeLuca's eyes briefly moved across the ballroom before returning to her. I've heard impressive things about your company. Thank you. Another silence. Then, and Elijah? The older woman asked. Naomi's entire body stiffened. Because that was the first time Mrs. DeLuca had ever spoken her son's name directly. The first time. Matteo noticed too. He's fine, Naomi answered carefully. Mrs. DeLuca nodded once. I would like to meet him properly someday. Shock nearly crossed Naomi's face before she controlled it. For 6 years, the DeLuca family had kept their distance from Elijah. Not openly rejecting him, but never fully embracing him either. And now suddenly, Naomi immediately sensed it. Something had changed. Matteo seemed to realize the same thing because he looked at his mother sharply. But Mrs. DeLuca remained calm. There's a charity auction beginning shortly, she said smoothly. Excuse me. Then she walked away. Naomi stared after her silently. What was that? She asked. Matteo exhaled slowly. I don't know. But Naomi did know one thing. People like the DeLucas never changed suddenly without a reason. And whatever that reason was, it was coming. Naomi couldn't sleep that night. Rain tapped softly against the windows of her London apartment while the city lights glowed faintly beyond the glass. Beside her, Elijah slept peacefully beneath a pile of blankets. One small arm wrapped around the stuffed lion Matteo had bought him 3 birthdays ago. Naomi stood quietly in the doorway watching her son. Then her phone buzzed. Matteo. She hesitated before answering. You're awake, he said immediately. So are you. A tired laugh escaped him softly. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Matteo finally said what both of them were thinking. My mother surprised you tonight. That's one word for it. She's never mentioned wanting to meet Elijah before. Naomi walked slowly toward the kitchen. And suddenly now she does. Matteo was silent. That silence confirmed her suspicion immediately. You know something. Another pause. Then, my grandfather's health has gotten worse. Naomi stopped moving. The De Luca family patriarch. The man whose opinion shaped almost every important decision inside the family empire. What happened? He collapsed 2 weeks ago. Matteo's voice sounded heavier now. The doctors are trying to stay optimistic, but they weren't optimistic. Naomi understood what he wasn't saying aloud. She leaned against the kitchen counter slowly. And now they suddenly remember Elijah exists. Naomi. No, her voice stayed calm, but hurt quietly beneath it. Don't do that. Don't defend this. I'm not defending anyone. Your family ignored my son for 6 years. He's my son too. She closed her eyes immediately. The pain in his voice made guilt rise inside her. Because despite everything, Matteo had never ignored Elijah, never failed him, never disappeared, and that complicated everything. Naomi softened slightly. I know, she whispered. Silence stretched gently between them. Then Matteo spoke again. My grandfather wants the family together. Naomi almost laughed at the irony. Families like the De Lucas always talked about togetherness after damage had already been done. What exactly does that mean? It means, Matteo exhaled slowly, they want to meet Elijah. Publicly. There it was. The real reason. Naomi's stomach tightened immediately. Publicly. Not privately. Not emotionally. Strategically. Because the De Luca empire was built on image, legacy, reputation. And now there was a 6-year-old grandson connected to the family name. A grandson nobody could pretend didn't exist anymore. I won't let them use him, Naomi said firmly. They won't. You can't promise that. I'll protect him. The words came instantly, without hesitation, and somehow that made it harder for her to stay angry. Because Matteo sounded exactly the same way he did whenever Elijah scraped his knee or got scared during thunderstorms. Protective. Certain. Father. Naomi sat down slowly at the kitchen table. You really think your family changed? No. Matteo admitted honestly. That answer surprised her. They're trying, he continued quietly. But change and acceptance aren't always the same thing. Naomi stared down at the table. There it was again. The honesty she once loved about him. Painful. Uncomfortable. Real. Then why are you asking me to do this? Because my grandfather may not have much time left. The room fell silent. And because, Matteo added softly, Elijah deserves the chance to decide for himself what kind of relationship he wants with that side of his family someday. Naomi swallowed hard. That was the problem with Matteo. Even when she wanted to completely shut him out, he sometimes made sense. Still, fear remained. Not fear for herself anymore. Fear for Elijah. Children noticed rejection quickly, and Naomi would never allow her son to feel unwanted the way she once did. What if they hurt him? She asked quietly. Matteo answered immediately. Then they lose me too. The words stunned her, because 6 years ago he hadn't been ready to draw that line. Now he was. Naomi leaned back slowly in her chair, emotionally exhausted. People changed. Time changed people. Maybe parenthood changed them most of all. Finally, she spoke. One dinner. Matteo went silent. One dinner, she repeated carefully. That's all I'm agreeing to. Relief moved through his voice instantly. Thank you. This isn't forgiveness. I know. And if anyone makes Elijah uncomfortable, we leave immediately. We will. Naomi stared toward the dark hallway leading to her son's room. Somewhere deep inside her chest, an old fear had already begun waking up again. Because inviting the De Luca family back into her life felt dangerous. Not because she still hated them, but because a small part of her was terrified she might still love Matteo enough to get hurt all over again. The De Luca estate looked exactly the same. Same towering gates. Same marble entrance. Same fountains glowing beneath golden lights. And somehow that made Naomi even more nervous. 6 years ago, She had walked through those doors hoping to become part of Mateo's world. Tonight, she walked through them only for her son. Nothing more. At least that was what she kept telling herself. "Elijah," she whispered gently, adjusting his small suit jacket. "Remember what we talked about?" The 6-year-old nodded seriously. "If I feel uncomfortable, we leave." Naomi kissed the top of his curls softly. "Exactly." Beside them, Mateo watched quietly. There was something emotional in his expression tonight. Almost protective. Almost grateful. When the front doors opened, several staff members greeted them immediately before leading them inside. Elijah's eyes widened. "This house is huge." Mateo smiled faintly. "I used to get lost in here when I was your age." "You did. All the time." That finally earned a laugh from the little boy. Naomi stayed quiet while they walked deeper into the mansion. Memories followed her through every hallway. The last dinner, the whispers, the humiliation, the feeling of not belonging. Her chest tightened slightly. Then Elijah slipped his small hand into hers. And suddenly she felt stronger again. The dining room doors opened slowly. Conversation stopped instantly. The DeLuca family sat around the massive table exactly as Naomi remembered. Except tonight, every pair of eyes moved immediately toward Elijah. Curious, careful, emotional, because there was no denying it now. The little boy looked unmistakably like a DeLuca. Mateo rested a gentle hand against Elijah's shoulder. "Elijah," he said softly, "this is your family." The child looked around nervously before giving a tiny wave. "Hi." Something in the room softened immediately, especially Mateo's grandfather. The older man slowly stood from his chair despite obvious weakness. His silver cane trembled slightly as he stared at the little boy. For several long seconds he said nothing at all. Then quietly, "He has my son's eyes." Emotion tightened Mateo's face instantly. Naomi noticed Mrs. DeLuca watching Elijah too. Not coldly this time, almost regretfully. Dinner began carefully. Conversation stayed polite at first. Elijah slowly relaxed after Mateo's younger cousin challenged him to talk about soccer. Soon the little boy was enthusiastically explaining his favorite players while half the table listened. And against her expectations, people smiled. Genuinely. Naomi watched cautiously from beside Mateo. This didn't feel like the same family from 6 years ago. But experience had taught her not to trust appearances too quickly. Then, halfway through dinner, Mrs. DeLuca finally spoke directly to her. "I owe you an apology." The room went completely still. Naomi blinked once, unsure she heard correctly. Mrs. DeLuca set down her glass carefully. "When Mateo first brought you into our lives, I saw you as a threat to tradition." Her voice remained calm but quieter than before. "I cared more about public perception than my son's happiness." No one interrupted, not even Mateo. The older woman looked toward Elijah briefly before continuing. "And because of my pride, I missed 6 years with my grandson." Emotion flickered across her face for only a second. But Naomi saw it. Real regret. Not performance. Not strategy. Regret. "I cannot undo the pain I caused you," Mrs. DeLuca said softly. "But I am sorry for it." Silence settled over the table again. Naomi didn't know what to say, because for years she imagined this apology. Imagined finally hearing the words. But now that it was happening, it didn't magically erase the damage. Still, something unexpected happened beside her. Elijah gently tugged her sleeve. "Mom!" She looked down. The little boy leaned closer and whispered innocently. "Grandma looks sad." Naomi's heart nearly broke right there. Children saw things adults buried beneath pride. Mrs. DeLuca heard it too. And for the first time since Naomi met her, the woman's eyes filled with tears. Tiny, controlled, but real. Then suddenly Elijah smiled brightly across the table. "It's okay," he announced. The entire room froze again, because forgiveness sounded strangely simple when spoken by a child. Naomi looked at her son carefully, then slowly toward Mateo. And in that moment she finally understood something painful. Love had not failed them 6 years ago. Fear had. Pride had. Silence had. But somewhere beneath all the damage, love had survived anyway. The invitation came 3 months later. Not from Matteo. From the De Luca family. Naomi stared at the cream-colored envelope on her kitchen table for a long time before opening it. Elijah was at school. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Inside was a formal invitation to a private family event at the De Luca estate. But this time the wording was different. No distance. No cold politeness. Just one line that stayed with her. "We would like you there as family." Naomi exhaled slowly. Family. A word that used to feel like a locked door. Now it felt like a question. The estate was warmer this time. Not in temperature. In energy. There was less tension in the air. Fewer guarded looks. Fewer whispered judgments behind polite smiles. And when Naomi arrived with Elijah, no one looked at her like she didn't belong anymore. Matteo was waiting near the entrance. When he saw them, something in his face softened immediately. Elijah ran straight into his arms. "Papa!" Matteo laughed quietly, lifting him up. "You're getting heavier." "I'm growing," Elijah said proudly. Naomi stayed back for a moment watching them. Then Matteo looked at her. And didn't look away. Not this time. "I'm glad you came," he said gently. Naomi nodded once. "I said I would." A pause. Then Matteo added, softer, "Thank you for not walking away from him. From us." The words hit differently now. Not like guilt. Like understanding. Inside the dining room, there was no performance tonight. No hidden agendas. Even Mrs. De Luca stood when Naomi entered. For a second, Naomi expected the old tension to return. But instead, the older woman simply said, "Naomi," a respectful nod. Not perfect, but real. Elijah immediately took over the room, talking excitedly, laughing, asking questions, pulling even the most serious family members into conversation without effort. And for the first time, Naomi saw something she never thought she would see here. Peace. Not perfection, but peace. Later that night, after dinner, the crowd slowly dispersed into smaller conversations around the estate gardens. Naomi found herself standing alone near the fountain she once walked past while crying years ago. "Funny, isn't it?" Matteo's voice came from behind her. She didn't turn. "What is? How the place that broke everything," he paused, "can also be where it starts to heal." Naomi finally looked at him. He was closer now. Not as the heir of a powerful family. Not as the man who once stood between two worlds. Just as Matteo. "I don't want confusion anymore," Naomi said quietly. Matteo nodded. "Neither do I." Silence. A long one. Then he stepped closer. "I spent years trying to balance everyone's expectations," he admitted. "My family. My name. My responsibility." Naomi listened without interrupting. "But I learned something," he continued. "You can't build a life by trying not to disappoint people. You just end up losing the person who matters most." Her breath slowed. Matteo reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Naomi's heart stopped immediately. He didn't rush. He didn't perform. He just spoke honestly. "I'm not asking you to forget the past," he said. "I'm asking you to stop letting it decide our future." A pause. Then softly, "Naomi Carter, will you build a family with me? Properly. Fully. No hesitation this time." Silence fell across the garden. Even the fountain seemed louder. Naomi looked at him for a long time. Not the man who once hesitated. Not the son trapped between loyalty and love. But the father who showed up. The man who came back. The one who stayed. Her eyes flickered toward the house where their son's laughter could still be heard faintly. Then back to Matteo. "You're sure?" she asked quietly. This time he didn't hesitate at all. "Yes." A breath. Then Naomi exhaled slowly. "All right." Matteo blinked. "All right what?" A faint smile touched her lips. "All right, Matteo." That was all she needed to say. His expression changed instantly. Relief, disbelief, emotion all at once. He didn't rush forward. He just let the moment settle between them. Then quietly, I won't waste this. Naomi nodded. You better not. From inside the house, Elijah's voice called out, Mom, Dad, come see. They both turned toward the sound. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi didn't feel like she was standing between two worlds anymore. She felt like she finally belonged in one. Sometimes love doesn't fail because it isn't real. It fails because people aren't ready for it. In this story, we saw how pride, fear, and family pressure almost destroyed something that was actually strong enough to survive everything. But in the end, time changed things. Not because everything became perfect overnight, but because people grew, they learned, and they chose healing over ego.
And that's the real lesson here. Sometimes, what breaks a relationship isn't the love, it's everything around it. Now, I want to ask you something. If you were Naomi, would you have forgiven him and given him another chance? Or would you have walked away for good? Let me know in the comments. I really want to see your thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more emotional stories like this. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.